What's up, Guerrilla Social Workers? This is the Guerrilla Social Work Podcast, your crackerjack clinical insurgents pitting evidence against anecdotes, with your hosts, the Volcano Taco himself, Jeff Moore, and yours faithfully, Mace Warren. Jeff and I are both forensic psychotherapists that specialize in the clinical treatment of folks involved in the criminal justice system. We love sharing our misguided musings with all of you, and we thank you so much for your ongoing listenership. The boys sit down today to talk about the colloquial term, playing the game, as it pertains to treatment. Now, while some practitioners discourage the use of such a term to describe something as important as clinical psychotherapy, the GSW crew looks at this as an opportunity to reinforce client buy-in to treatment. We really enjoyed this conversation. We hope you do too. If you haven't already, take a hike over to the 5-Star Radiance house, grab his garbage can and fill it with muddy water, place that can leaning against his door, and knock and run. You'll love it. And now, on with the show. And here we go.
Are you ready?
Hey, that was pretty good.
Thank you.
Dude, can you remember when Korn first came out?
Yeah, of course.
Man, I bet.
They were intense, dude.
Yeah, it was. You know what I never understood about that band was, you know when MTV played music back in the day?
I remember those days.
And you had like Kurt Loder, and he was talking about how Korn was also like hip hop too.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
He called it hip hop?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All the time.
And Korn collaborated with Ice Cube.
It wasn't not like Kurt Loder specifically. They like a lot of, what are they? Not DJs.
VJs.
Not really VJs either, because he wasn't really a VJ.
VJJ, maybe?
Dudes on MTV, like music analysts, I guess. I don't know. They were like, oh yeah, it's a mix between metal and hip hop. I'm like, hip hop? I mean, they had a couple of songs that were kind of like that, but in general, no.
Not really, no.
No. That's
a bad take.
Yeah, that's really weird. It's almost like they were forcing it a little bit.
Oh.
They like wanted it to be there. Yeah.
Linkin Park might be an example of that.
Only that one guy that, have you ever noticed that guy? I don't know if that he has that one line that finds its way into every song. It doesn't even matter how hard you try. I'm like, it's like, hold on.
Why do you say that every song?
I know. Yeah. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah. What, you're trying to inject some message.
Damn, dude. Like, yeah, you just want to sit down. You've had a lot of failure in life.
Yeah. Successful band for such a loser.
Yeah. They always reminded me of, well, I mean, they had some pretty good songs. And then, who's that dude? It wasn't his name Chester or something.
Yeah, he's
R.I.P.
gone. Yeah.
That was the same time that band Stained came out. Remember them?
Yeah, kind of.
Every song was sad. Can you imagine like going to a concert with one of your buddies and you're just sitting there the whole time?
You're just crying.
Like, I mean, I like going to concerts that are like upbeat, you know, but every song's about some girl dumping you.
Yeah.
Like, damn.
Yeah.
Dude, I had some thoughts on this one thing I was going to run by you. I don't know if I uniquely have this experience or you do too, but you can tell me. And I've noticed this predominantly at the jail, like, well, not just at the jail, just like anywhere where there's shared office space. And it's, so you have a perfectly fine item in there, right? Like, I'll give you an example. So I brought a laptop desk in there, and it was rinky dink. I mean, it wasn't expensive. It was, but when I brought it in there, everything was solid, right? Had a little like place for the laptop, and then it had a place for the mouse, right? And it rose up so you could kind of stand if you wanted to. And anyway, I brought it in there because at one point because of COVID, we were all over the place.
Right.
Well, maybe 2 weeks later, I walk in, and then the mouse thing where the mouse was totally broken off. And I was like,
what happened?
Well, an effort had to go into that, because I was thinking to myself, I'm like, what
was it though that was broken?
So it was like a metal piece that it had wheels on the bottom, and then just a straight metal bar that went up, and it had an arm that stretched
spot
out
for the mouse.
Mm-hmm. And then it was they were wooden, and so you had screws going into the wood. I mean, it was a solid piece,
sure.
right?
Got it.
And so I'm like, how much pressure had to have been applied to break that off? You know what I mean? And
significant.
The answer is a lot. I was like, so either that was kinetic energy or like it fell, but I can't imagine where it would have fallen.
Would falling even break it? I
don't know. I mean, it was solid enough, or somebody had to wrench it, because that's not normal wear and tear, right? Or like one of the laptops we use in there, the charging cord, it's like perfectly fine. And then the next week you come in and then like where it meets with like the power coupling or whatever, like the wires are all stretched out. Like, hold on, how did we get there? What happened? Like what happened in between the amount of time? And I'm always really curious, like how does this happen? Because I don't ever run into those things.
Well, isn't it kind of the drive it like a rental?
Yeah, I guess, but those are weird like damages, right? Like, I mean, if you're driving it like a rental and you run into a garbage can, it's obvious. There's a dent right in the front, but these are like, I mean, and I can't imagine somebody like looking around at work, pulling cords apart
or drive it like a U-Haul.
Yeah. And then after it's broken, after that laptop disc is broken, it's just left in there and put back on as if that's going to fix it. And then I notice, I'm like, wait, what's going on here? Just pick it up. I'm like,
maybe it was if an inmate had done it, we'd have probably known about it.
Right. Oh, no, it wasn't an inmate. Yeah. But do you ever notice that when you go to our offices? Like, because we have a lot of shared office space. And I just wonder if you ever...
I try not to keep anything of value in those.
Well, the lamps by themselves, I'm like, how did that lamp, how is it completely like disconnected from the base?
I know.
Like so many rotations of that would have had to gone around before it. You know what I mean? It's so weird.
Chairs get beat to shit.
Chairs, that makes sense though.
But beat.
Yeah.
Not just sat in. Like beaten.
It reminds me, dude, of like, our friend Alan Berninga. We call him Little Alan compared to Big Alan. Like he was such a shit dude back in the day. Like I'd have my homework or something on my, like when I used to drive around and with him in it a lot, and I'd have my homework on the passenger seat, right? And then he'd get in and like push it on the ground and then deliberately like stomp on it and like rip things up. I'm like, oh man,
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, that's what comes to mind when I think about like that stuff.
That's what's happening.
I mean, something's going on there, dude. Like
a couch.
Yeah. Dude, that was funny. Yeah. So. Well, yeah. I came across a George Orwell quote, and it made me think of talking about an assignment that you and I've been like kind of kicking around for, I don't know, 2 years now to try to like standardize it, put it into like a curriculum that we can teach it in a group type setting. And so the quote was, and this reminded me of it, and this kind of got me onto like drawing some of it. So it says, so I don't mess this up here. People sleep peaceably in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf.
Dude, right? Cops use that. That's like kind of like a thing with cops.
Right.
Yeah. It's like a slogan thing.
So I was thinking about just like, I mean,
I didn't know that was Orwell though.
Yeah. That was Orwell. And I was thinking about like just how everybody's at each other's throats these days, but I
hadn't noticed.
Yeah. And it's kind of ramping up in its own little way. I mean, look no further than old Will Smith. Like,
I thought you were going to bring that up. Yeah.
Everybody's seen it 300 times by now, but I'm like, okay, like now most of the time, like, there's a lot of cliches around this stuff. And I just don't know if they add up very well. So like things like, and you hear these in treatment, right? Like hurt people.
Oh yeah.
Like, I mean,
cliche.
I'm going to say this and then I'm going to blow your mind. Right. Or silence is violence.
Right.
I'm like, violence is violence. Last time I checked, like that's,
just like little sayings, basically.
Like silence. I was like, dude, you're just not going to talk to me? Like,
okay. Silence is not violence.
I can deal with that for eternity. I promise.
Yeah.
Like, right. You slap me enough times and I don't know, I might get mildly irritated.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't talk to me, wonderful. Yeah. No, but I was thinking about some of this stuff and how we look at like violence towards one another and how that starts to play into, I guess our clients' lives and really what that boils down to, like when they're making decisions about, I don't know, choosing to violate rules or choosing to follow the rules and stuff like that. And it reminded me of, it made me kind of think about a couple incidents like Ruby Ridge and Waco, you know what I mean? And you look back at those, and those, I mean, if you know anything about them, I mean, there's a really good, it's a drama on
Waco?
Netflix. Yeah. Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I mean, crazy, right? Like crazy how, and I think that opened up with Ruby Ridge too, like a little.
That kind of kicked it off, right?
Yeah. Like if the government wants to, and not just the government, but like whoever's in charge, whoever has the most guns, let's say that, whoever has the most guns, the most willpower, the most ability to do violence, like whoever has that, I mean, if they want to, they're going to get what they want at the end of the day. That's what those two stories taught me, right? And I'm thinking, okay, that I don't think people think that far ahead because they don't need to, and most people just want to be civil to one another. But I think for, a lot of clients that we work with, when it comes to consequential thinking, it kind of helps frame it in this way to kind of think of like, okay, eventually, where do these things go? Because at one point or another, if you think about this, like if you're a general citizen, right? And what do you want more than anything? Like if you're just trying to live your life and, do whatever you're doing, I mean, what do you want, more intervention or less intervention from the government?
Leave me alone.
Leave me alone. That's probably what a citizen wants more than anything.
Yeah.
They just want to be left alone, right? And if you think about anybody who's in authority, we'll call it the government in this case, like, what do you think their obligation is? If you're the citizen and they're over you, what do they want more than anything?
Your tax dollars.
Yeah. they want control in some aspect or another, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a give and take. Like I'm not saying
we authorize them to take some level of control for our safety and security.
Sure. Okay. Now, here's the thing though, is if under the right circumstances, that can turn into a violent action if on their end, if they're saying no matter what, we're going to get what we want, right? Unless it comes to us deciding to say, okay, I'm going to comply with this whatever it is, right? Regardless of how silly it is. Okay. So I was thinking like, okay, so I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to offer you a government show of force, okay? And for every government show of force I give to you, you need to respond with an equal but opposite reaction to that says, I'm not going to comply with that. And that could include you showing your own force to not comply with it. Make sense?
Okay, I think so.
So let's say you have a toilet that is only supposed to flush a half gallon per flush, and plumbers, I have no clue what toilets flush.
I'm gonna need more than that.
A gallon per flush, and your toilet is currently flushing 2 gallons per flush, right?
Yeah.
And somehow through the gallon flush meter, the government becomes aware of this, right?
That I have a 2 gallon.
That you have a 2 galloner, right?
Yeah.
And so they say, well, we can't have this, right? That's a code violation. So their first intervention is they send you a nicely worded letter that says, Mr. Moore, we recognize you have blah, 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 blah. We ask that you please fix this situation within 30 days, or we will give you a fine, right? So what is your equal but opposite show of, I'm not going to do that?
I don't know if it's what you're looking for, but I'd probably file it in my hefty bag lined filing cabinet.
Okay. So you throw it in the garbage, right? Okay. Pretty simple. No violence so far. All right. So then you receive another notice, right? And the next notice says, Mr. Moore, 60 days ago, we notified you of this and you still have not complied. You now are receiving a $25 fine and you need to correct the action. You have 30 days to complete this. Please remit payment to okay? And now what is your reaction?
I mean, and you're wanting me to intentionally dig my heels in and not just say fine. Oh, because that
right. Because you have to say, this is a dumb rule and I'm not going to follow it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just would ignore it then. Cause I mean, I can't just pay $25 and not fix it. Cause maybe I don't feel like it's the government's job to tell me how many gallons I can flush, and I don't have the time and energy to go get the 1 gallon tank. So I don't want to just pay the $25. So I'll just ignore it entirely.
Okay. So you just ignore it again.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So then they send you a third notice, right? And the third notice says, Mr. Moore, you have, 10 business days to fix this. The fine is now $150.
Oh, jeez.
And please remit payment to this. If you don't comply, then we will have an officer come to your house.
Whoa.
or not even an officer. We'll have a representative come to your house and collect payment or something like that, right? Okay, so they stepped up the game a little bit. Your fine has now gone up what?
A lot.
106
times.
Yeah, 100 over 100%. Okay, so now what do you do?
Well, it has the representative come to my house?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, I mean, if I continue to ignore it, will the representative show up?
Yeah. So if you ignore it again, so now homeboy shows up, and he shows up, with his clipboard, and I mean, he's in his, I don't know,
geek suit.
Yeah, his toilet flushing uniform.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm here to collect payment. And if you don't provide payment, then our next step is to, bring a police officer here, our next step is to file this with the local jurisdiction. And if you don't show up to court, you're going to be found in contempt of court. So now the guy's standing in front of you. Okay.
I might try to schmooze him a little, maybe invite him in for a drink, but to explain my situation, be like, look, dude, here's why I haven't done this. I can't really afford these fines. I certainly can't afford to get my entire toilet tank. Can we just forget about this?
Yeah.
But I'd send him on his way. I'd try to be nice though.
So you try to talk him out of it.
I try to talk him out of it.
All right. So then he doesn't. He says, okay. So then now you receive a summons. You receive a subpoena in the mail that says you have to go in front of Judge Judy or whoever.
Yeah.
And if you don't show up to court, that not only are you going to have a contempt of court, that you could face up to 30 days in jail and a $5,000 fine at this point. In addition to, you still have to fix your toilet. Okay. So this is a summons in the mail. You can receive a subpoena. What is your equal show of force in reaction to not complying?
The same. I'm not showing up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're found in contempt of court.
Continued resistance, I guess.
All right. So now you're found in contempt of court.
Passive resistance.
And the judge during court, you're not there. So Judge Judy says, we're going to find him in contempt of court, and we're going to put a warrant out for his arrest. Okay. So now an officer shows up to your house, a police officer, knocks on the door. You answer, Mr. Moore, I'm going to have to take you into custody per this, that, and the other.
I'm still digging my heels in.
Please turn around, put your hands behind your back. Okay. Now, what is your equal and opposite show of force to say I'm not going to comply?
I don't turn around, put my hands behind my back. Maybe I shut the door.
Okay. So then he knocks on the door again. He doesn't go away. He calls him back up. Okay. Now they have more people in your house. And, they're saying, okay, we're going to enter your house by force and take you into custody if you don't come out now, right? And you're going to get additional charges for resisting arrest, and that could be up to whatever that is in terms of years in jail or months in jail or whatever, right? And your equal and opposite reaction to that is what?
Barricade the doors. Yeah, okay. Hide in the closet.
Yeah. Okay.
I like that you open with an Orwell quote.
Yeah.
My God, dude.
So then they say, okay, and they get the battering ram, and they bust down your door. And then now they have guns drawn because they don't know what's going on. There's pretty standard police protocol because they're entering into a dwelling that I'm sure there's a safety issue. And now they're going to take you by force, but you're still not complying with this. So what is your only equal and opposite reaction to not comply with that?
They've got guns drawn up. Well, I might run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But if they have helicopters and heat signatures and they find you, then what? Because you can't give up.
I'm in a fight.
Okay. And if they fight you and then they start using deadly force, what do you do?
I mean, I'm probably going to lose, but I'd see how quick I could get to my strap and go to work.
Okay. And then eventually
I'm going to get killed.
Eventually you're going to get killed.
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
Now this is just silly.
Freaking
Okay.
toilet
Right.
water.
Okay. No,
bro.
exactly. It's silly, right?
Yeah.
And it's toilet water. And I'm sure somewhere in there, like, they're probably just going to garnish wages or something. That's probably what would happen, or turn your water off or something like that, right? Or force somebody to come out and fix it. I don't know. But the premise is that if I choose to not comply with this, our clients are entering into kind of what we call a zero-sum game, in that no matter how they're playing this, it's always going to end on the side of people who can do violence at a much higher level than them, right? And impose their will. Now, that doesn't happen, fortunately, for things like toilets and everything. But think how many times our clients have chosen not to follow a rule just because they think it's stupid, right? And then, I think most people, when a cop's at your door saying, put your hands behind your back, we're done. You're tapping out at that point, right?
That's about as,
That's about as far as most people go.
Probably would have cowed before that even, but.
Well, right. Now, here's my thing though, is, if you're going to take that line and say, well, I'm not going to comply, you kind of have to be in for a penny, in for a pound.
Sure.
Because if you're counting on the other side to give up. That's what you're counting on. You're counting on, I'm not going to do that. But, really the reason why we give in is because, oh, it's serious. The handcuffs are out, right? Okay, I guess we're serious now. Well, it was probably serious before, but the sting that I have to take and the drawback that I have to deal with, it is much less if I just would have fixed my damn toilet to begin with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same. I kind of get the same rationale behind like why it's important to avoid street fights and things like that, is because you always have to expect that the other person's willing to take it one step further.
Yeah, dude. I always just think about Joe Pesci from Casino.
Oh my God.
Like,
what a great scene.
Robert De Niro is talking about, like, if you beat him in a fight, he'll get a bat. If you bring a bat, he'll bring a gun.
Right,
like,
right,
okay,
right,
I'd stop it
exactly.
like halfway between fights and bats. Like,
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there are people like that out there.
Oh yeah.
And what I'm saying is the people you can count on to win that is going to be the government. So I'm just saying, like, the people who are in authority, and again, you choose to comply or not comply, but by you saying, okay, I guess you're going to handcuff me, you're now complying. That's you complying.
Right.
But you've also, and what I'm saying is, no, you still gave in. You still lost that game. Only you lost a ton of freedoms along the way, right?
That's the zero sum.
Right. So kind of what I
lose. If you win, it means I lose. Like, I can't lose without you winning.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So when I was thinking about this, I think it's really important that we teach clients that even though they think those rules are silly sometimes, and they refer to them, they use game terms, right? They'll say, oh, it's just hoops I got to jump through, right?
Just got to play the game.
Yeah. So one of the things that we get into this is I've kind of said that when you think about court involvement, incarceration, arrest, treatment, and supervision, they call it a game. And normally professionals that work with them, they tell them what? What do they say in response to this?
It's not a game.
Yeah.
You take this serious.
You think this is a game? Stuff like that.
You're not internalizing treatment.
So the kind of what I was saying here was the thought process behind this is this response is likely an assumption that the client is trivializing their current circumstances, and it's to their own detriment. So we're not like saying this is good for them. We're saying they're doing that to their own detriment. And we want to send a message that if you don't take this seriously, dude, you're doomed. Like, you're screwed, right? What I was thinking though is, like, why not just invite them, if they're using this, like, just invite them to think about recovery and treatment through the prism of a game, okay? And say that that's not necessarily a maladaptive way of thinking, right? Because strategic games, those rely on decision-making process in terms of situations where outcomes depend on whatever the player is choosing to do, right? So I'm saying, well, I don't know, if we're turning this into a strategic game that's for their benefit, can't we just make that work for them in its own little way?
Yeah, I think that this pairs nicely with the whole concept of personal risk versus appointed risk, in that a lot of times kind of talking to clients about, that, like, for appointed risk, risk that isn't something that the client has a problem with, like maybe a client has drug problems. And so personal risk for them would be, being around situations where there's drugs present. But a lot of our sex offense clients can't go to a park, even though their offense had nothing to do with going to a park. And they get bent out of shape about having to follow the risk factors that have been appointed to them by AP&P, but encouraging them to look at it as a game. Don't personalize it. This isn't about you. This isn't about people saying that you're too risky to be at a park, that you're going to go snatch some kids off the monkey bars. It's nothing to do with that. It's just a game. Show you can jump through the hoop, show that you can just, play the game. Don't go to parks for a while, and you'll end up beating this board.
Right. And I think when you think about that, like it's not, and so what I'm saying is when you think about the game aspect, we're not talking about the trivialization of treatment or necessarily the fun of it. We're talking about the strategy, because if you're in a game that takes multiple steps, right, you sometimes will sacrifice things to win that. Like, I mean, chess is probably one of those like more strategic games than the other, right? And there's often sacrifices that take place in terms of moves that then put a person in a much better position, because you're kind of like getting the other person to kind of do what you want them to do. And it's not, it is manipulation for sure, but that's not necessarily a bad word. I mean, manipulation kind of depends on what your intended outcomes are. If your intended outcomes are harm, well, yeah, manipulation is bad. But if your intended outcomes are like mutual benefit for one another, I think a lot of our clients, especially being involved in the criminal justice system, are doubted from day one about their success. And often, I mean, statistically too, it's no, if you look at them, you can say with not just my personal opinion, just statistically, they're probably going to go back to prison, right? They're going to recidivate
50-something%.
Right. So now we try to disconnect from that a little bit and try to pay attention to the idea that they are progressing and making, but we're wrong sometimes, obviously that just happens, but it doesn't mean that we can't teach them that, well, yeah, it's a strategy. And as much as you don't buy into this as being meaningful for you, that's okay. It is meaningful for somebody else. And that's a little bit gamey, and that's okay. It's not necessarily a maladaptive trait associated with this. So if they want to categorize it as that, fine, right? But I want to teach them some of the differences there, because I don't know, like that comes into play. What are some other things that come up, like when clients say, oh yeah, it's just your game, I'm just playing the game, dude, like stuff like that? What are some things that come up like that for clients with you?
Well, like as far as I think this will answer your question. I'm going to answer it with a question.
Yeah, maybe I asked a shitty question.
Like you're being more clear about, like, when you say game, you're talking strategy, using chess as an example, making a sacrifice move to get your opponent to be baited into doing what you want them to do, so that then you can capitalize for a greater gain. Yeah. That would be an example of the strategy, such that like not going to a park for a while would get me off probation eventually. Yeah, the trivialization is with like when, like, do you think that people that this isn't a game, they're looking at game as being like, this doesn't matter, it's lighthearted, it's all just bullshit, I don't need to pay attention to this, it's nothing more than just whoop-de-doo, like kind of like that's what people are pushing back on when they hear game, is they think it means like making light of, that trivializing.
But then also, like, for the clients, and I think sometimes they trivialize certain things as well and make them out to be less than they are. So an example of that that we run into often, I think, is like pornography is a pretty good example. Like they just categorize it's not a big deal, right?
Oh yeah, right.
And I mean, anybody listening to this and any clinician or officer or client, they can agree or disagree with that. That's not what's important. I think that eventually the mileage runs out on that, though. I mean, we can say it's not that big of a deal. Okay. All right. And I don't overreact when my client, if I have a client who looks at pornography against, conditions that are probation, or maybe like on the substance use front, if they were using meth and now they're using marijuana or had a beer or something like that. It's not the same, but it's kind of in the same, ballpark and stuff. And they can trivialize that easy and chalk this up to other people's overreaction. No, I don't overreact, but I also don't think it's a non-issue. Because if I say, well, look, yeah, it might, in the grand scheme of things, it might not be that big of a deal. But if it's not that big of a deal, and you're telling me it's not that big of a deal, shouldn't it be pretty easy to knock it off then? I mean, just temporarily while you're trying to, you're on a period of probation. It's a finite period of time. It's just an opportunity to show that under the right circumstances, you can be trusted. And then once you've done that, a lot of times you get your freedoms back, and this doesn't happen, right?
It's a game.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's not trivial. It's serious. It's a game with dire consequences. I mean, including loss of freedom, up to and including death if you so choose, right? Depending on if you want to resist.
It's like Squid Game.
Yeah.
But yeah, right.
But I mean, that's the whole thing is now, again, I, as a therapist, I'm not advocating. It's not like I'd ever get violent with a client, but as a surrogate, an officer would, if it came down to it. If they said, well, we're going to take you into custody, and the client, no, you're not. Okay, and we're going to have to take you into custody. Here we go. No, you're not. Oh, well, what's the next step? It can only escalate to the point, up to the point of death. That's all it can include, right?
Right.
That's the only other option.
That's intense, but it's true. Happens all the time, right?
Right. So what I'm saying is those decisions, in a lot of ways, are much more important on the front end. And they're more important, in my opinion, because they're just they're just so much easier to manage.
You mean the upfront opinions, not like whether or not to look at porn in the first place?
Right.
Yeah.
That is such an easier thing to manage than I'm at your door, I'm taking you into custody.
Yeah.
And you have to that is so much more difficult. And one begets the other. And so this is for sure a zero-sum game. And for those of you who don't believe, know what a zero-sum game is, so kind of how I wrote this was clients' behaviors are a good way to determine the type of game they are playing in recovery. So there's different types of games, but the most ineffective ones for clients to play is the one we've been talking about, which is called a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is one in which no benefit is either created or destroyed. So in a two-player zero-sum game, whatever one player wins, the other loses. So I'm going to take complete control over you, and you're going to lose total freedom. And total loss of freedom is death. You have nothing at that point. I've exercised complete control over you up to the point that you no longer exist, right? That's what I'm saying. And you have lost everything at that point, including your own life. Yeah. So that type of game, the players share no common interests and are highly competitive with one another. There are two types of zero-sum games, those with perfect information and those with imperfect information. This is important. In a game with perfect information, every player knows the results of all previous moves. And in games with imperfect information, players do not know all of the previous moves. And so in other words, you will not, our clients are playing the worst type of game, a zero-sum imperfect game, in that I never really know what's going on the other end. And I'm trying to predict this based on luck or, you know what I mean?
Just trying to scrape together whatever you observe other people doing and the consequences they get. But
well, right. So think of how many of our clients, this is, they gripe about, well, so-and-so did this and then they got this sentence and that's way worse than what I did. Right. Okay.
Right.
And I know what's happening. You're trying to start predicting those moves in the future of what the court, what law enforcement, what your therapist might do based on other people's experiences. Right. So it's normal. That's normal. That's good. Actually, you're gathering information that you can, but it is so different. I mean, usually when one client is comparing himself to another, what do they usually miss when they're doing that?
I'm not sure what you mean.
What information are they missing about the other person when they're trying to
Oh, well, I don't know if this is quite what you're going for, but a lot of people compare their blooper reel to someone else's highlight reel. They only see the good that the other person gets, or the successes, or they're not getting the negatives. They're not seeing they're seeing a kind of a one-way view of another person's entirety.
Right. And I've never seen it where one client compares like their circumstance to another client and they're like, well, so this is what happened to me. And I got these charges for, possession with intent to distribute. And he got this, but then he only got this much time and I got this much time. There's always stuff that's left out, whether it's lack of criminal history on the other end or mitigating circumstances or who knows? I don't even know.
Right.
So I appreciate what
it's like a lopsided view of reality.
Right. And I appreciate what they're trying to do there. Like, again, it's I really don't have all the information. I don't know the moves that have been made. And so I can't now predict what's going to happen. And so my next move, as far as the game goes, is based on what? I mean, I don't know what to do without that information. And so that imperfection, and not only that, when you compare that to POs, right? I mean, are POs just robots?
It's a lot of variability between POs, a lot of variability with the same PO day to day.
Right.
Have they had lunch yet?
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, I was seeing some statistics things on conviction rates, and this is off of a podcast I was listening to. I think it was Radio Lab, and they were talking about the conviction rates associated with the last case before lunch are like the worst,
dude.
Yeah, compared to early morning and after lunch.
Everyone has kind of suspected that.
Yeah,
and it's funny that was like shown to be actual.
Well, and it just, I think it makes decent sense in that. But you know what's cool about that? Because it makes sense in that maybe everybody's kind of like they're just little, like they're hungry, obviously. As a result of that hunger, maybe they're a little bit more emotional. If they're a little bit more emotional, their decision making is impaired slightly. And so they'll make different decisions they wouldn't normally make if they, were calm and cool, collected. It's
like an unfunny Snickers commercial.
Yeah. Well, that's why Snickers has that commercial, is because there's some truth to that. You know what I mean? But that's cool that you have those stats, because then you can predict it and I can try to make moves again. So if I'm an attorney, I'm going to try to push that to maybe right after lunch, right? Or the first one in the morning or something like that. All those things make sense. Again, buying into that game. But I think for our clients to be diametrically opposed to authority is just not a great line for them. It's just not a good way for them to approach this, because eventually they're going to comply and now they've lost the game. So if they want to do this, we have to teach them to make moves strategically to come back out on top. But it's not going to be a zero-sum game where they win.
I think that's important to point out, because another piece of when clients play games, it's the kind of the cops versus robbers type of game. It's like in an institution, it's the game of what can we get into prison? How can we make a hustle off of this? What can we get away with? It's and that's also a game, and I think that maybe that's what people in our line of work assume is meant when you're trying to pitch a completely different view of the matter.
Well, and think about that. That is, clients try and while they're in an institution, a secure institution, they're just trying to exercise additional freedoms. That's all they're trying to do.
Yeah,
They're trying to artificially develop new freedoms by bringing in these additional components.
Sure,
that's what they're trying to do. And so I said, well, yeah, that's kind of what you could have been able to accomplish in the first place. But this outright defiance pits you against the authority, right? And then you want to think, okay, I want to come out with a zero-sum game and I'm going to win. But when in the history has that ever happened? Like, have you ever heard of anybody, any criminal that, the police are aware of and actively combating, that the police were like, okay, you win. Well, we won't do anything.
It doesn't go that way.
It never ever has that happened. Right. So instead, one of the things we want to be able to do is kind of shift them into this idea of what we call a positive sum game. Okay. So the positive sum game, which is good news. They can still play a game, but we want to teach them, this is the game you want to play. The zero sum game, it's unwinnable. It's unwinnable for us. It's unwinnable for you. The only people who can win that collectively is this entity called the government.
Right. Well, and real quick before you go to, I don't even know if I'm thinking of this right necessarily, but the type of game that we're talking about inmates play with, sneaking drugs into prison, like that's kind of on the flip side of a zero-sum game, in that when the inmates win, the correctional officers lose, right? Because they're getting contraband into the facility.
Right.
Would it work that way?
Kind of. But I mean, really, what the only problem with that is really what's like any of the correctional officers losing at that point?
Well, I guess nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, because it has to be done in a clandestine way, right? Because if it's not done in a clandestine way, then what happens?
It gets busted.
Right. And then if I get busted, then my little freedoms that I have within the institution, then those get revoked as well. Right.
The correctional officer doesn't get hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're only a legend in your own mind at that point. Like, you've only won in your own mind, because any outward advertisement of this saying that I beat you on this front, you'd be foolish to do that, because then you're just going to go in the hole. Right.
Like, cool. You got some heroin in.
Yeah. Good for you, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. There's just no way to go about that. So,
yeah. Okay.
So
positive sum.
Yeah. Positive sum game. So this is basically saying, unlike kind of the zero sum game, in a positive sum game, there's no universally accepted solution to a positive sum game. In a zero sum game, there's a winner and a loser. The end. In a positive sum game, there's not one solution to it, right? So there's also no single best strategy that's preferable to everyone playing the game, okay? Nor is it an easily predictable outcome, which is pretty much every one of our clients' lives, right? I can't really predict the outcome of this. There's not really a best strategy for doing this. And there's no one strategy that's going to work for everybody the same way. So these aren't really competitive necessarily, because you don't have to look at your like law enforcement or probation officer as a competition. It doesn't have to be me against them. Now, I think we rightly tell them they're probably not going to be your best friend. In fact, I don't think they should be, nor should I, right? But I don't know. How do we encourage clients to view their POs in turn?
It's kind of that whole important relationship, preferred relationship.
Yeah.
Kind of that whole concept.
Right. It's an important relationship. I may not prefer that
Might
person.
not be preferred, but it's important.
I have to acknowledge it as being an important relationship.
And therefore,
right?
nurture it in some capacity.
Right. Because if you think, in terms of a representative of this collective entity, because overall, we can all think about goals, but like a PO's role in that, what's their major role? What do they represent? What are they trying to accomplish?
Community safety.
Right. Yeah. So community safety, and they're a liaison between, law enforcement or the courts or as a whole, and the client.
Right.
And they do pass judgment, and they do make judgment calls on behaviors, such that if they assume that the client's doing well enough, they say, okay, we've got enough information here where we can say he doesn't need to be under supervision anymore. He can go live his life. Right. That's a very valuable component of a person's treatment. Like that, if not the most valuable component, like, you know what I mean?
Right. What we do doesn't have much teeth if not for them.
Right. So again, I don't have to like that. It just is a valuable component that I need to recognize. So it also, one of the things I also said was these games are not necessarily like when they're engaging in those, they don't also have to be in conflict of one another, because both have, well, there's some complementary interest for the overall. So if you think about where is some common ground between a therapist, a client, and a PO, because there is. What's the common ground that all three of those people want?
Well, I don't know. A pleasant interaction.
Pleasant interaction, but long term, right?
Success
of the client, right? Because if a PO has success of the client, all that means for him is that
off the caseload.
Off my caseload. I don't have to worry about this person anymore.
Doesn't have to write a warrant request.
Right. I don't have to. I don't. And it's not just. Not that POs are trying to avoid doing work. What it is just saying that, yeah, they've demonstrated enough stable behavior that I no longer have to be burdened with them. Now there's going to be another person.
They don't have to go through the effort of having to bring somebody into custody to handcuff them. They don't want to do all that. They don't want to chase someone down the street and tackle them. And,
right. Like I would think that if I'm an officer in any capacity, every interaction I have to take somebody into custody is a potential danger to me.
Yeah.
And I would want to avoid that.
Ideally, you want a slow day as an officer.
Yeah. And if it happens, it happens, right? Because I think any officer who's doing that for like wanting to do that, circa Mike Lowry,
Mike Lowry.
He's like, what
a great show.
Yeah. That show, all of them, they collectively kill like 300 people. I'm like, God, is there any accountability?
Yeah.
They just get yelled at and they're like, off you go.
Is that where Will Smith got the idea? You can just do whatever.
Oh, so there's been so many other ones. I mean, if that's where it came from, that's awesome. I mean, that's an awesome show. Yeah. But so the common ground is success. And again, so the PO wants success, and you can say, well, that's not for the right reasons. I don't care. What's the right reasons. A therapist wants success.
It's a shared goal and an agreement of a desired outcome.
Right. Yeah. And here's the tricky part. And this is where sometimes we as therapists get caught up. I don't care why my client is choosing to do the right thing, quote unquote, right. Like when I'm saying right, I'm talking about like morals. A lot of times are just about compliance, right? You don't have to believe in the rule to follow the damn rule. Okay. We all do that to some degree. It's the same reason why we stop at red lights, but not at stop signs. Like, as if there's mythical demons in that red light.
That's funny.
Like,
that's true, huh?
You know what I mean? Yeah. But we all do that.
Yeah.
So we're compliant. It's not a moral question. We're just doing that. So I don't care why my client is making the correct decision, so long as they're making the correct decision. But
before you move on to that, the pushback, I mean, I agree, but the pushback is going to be that means the client maybe hasn't actually taken to heart the treatment concepts. And as soon as the law isn't looking over their shoulder, they're going to go right back to what they were doing. So how would you respond to that?
Well, that perhaps is the case. However, if the only reason that they're making those decisions is in self-interest, then I think we're home free. I always want to be answering the question of what's in it for me, for the client. I always want to be answering that question as a therapist. Okay. What's in it for me? Because again, you trying to externalize that and turning it into this like altruistic reason to follow these rules. Somebody could lie to you and say, yeah, I agree with that. That's why I'm following this. Right.
It appeases me as a therapist. I'm like, he gets it. This client gets it.
Right.
Meanwhile, he's lying.
Right. And if in his mind, he's saying to himself, you know what? Like, I don't really care about this rule. And I've actually had fantasies of strangling this dude. And I love it. I love thinking about that. I'm not going to though, because if I do that, then I would for sure get caught. And even if I was on the run, I'd only have a little bit of freedoms before I was caught. And then it would come down to me or them. And I don't want to go back to prison. And, I was saying, okay, I don't.
As long as he's not strangling people.
Exactly. I do not care. I don't care. So, and I mean, I don't have to get into nitty gritty details about that with clients. I just have to help them get to the point where that decision-making process has gotten to the degree that they are making those decisions. Because when you're making decisions like within your best interest, then, okay, we're home free. I mean, and a lot of people would say, well, yeah, Ted Bundy thought that was in his best interest. Ted Bundy was only thinking about, the problem with him is he only thought about the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, if I only think about the next 5 minutes, that is in my best interest. But
if Ted Bundy were able to see into his future, into, old Sparky.
Right. The most important person in Ted Bundy's world was Ted Bundy. Mm-hmm. Use that to your advantage if you're a therapist.
He didn't want to die.
Trust me. He didn't care about those girls, and he never would. There's not anything in the world that I could do to convince that guy to care about those girls.
You're not going to teach him compassion.
I do know he likes himself though, right?
Yeah.
And I can utilize that. And again, as a therapist, I can manipulate that not to harm Ted Bundy and certainly not to harm future victims. I'm doing that for a good outcome, meaning this guy is going to lead a productive life, not because he thinks killing is wrong. It's because he knows it's going to impact him negatively getting to the electric chair. I'm saying if he knew that that was the end result, I think he would have acted differently. You know what I mean? Right. He assumed he wasn't going to get caught, and damn, the dude escaped twice.
No kidding.
Tons
Seriously,
of confidence.
dude,
Holy
what
hell.
in the world?
Yeah. Amazing stuff. So last thing on this is that players engage in a positive sum game. It implies that they have interests in common and to achieve an outcome that maximizes total payoffs. So when you look at that, you say, look, there are for sure common interests between you and this person. I promise you. How do we get there? How do we get there that you and the PO or you and the therapist or who, because we have therapists too that we work with who are just sometimes just disagreeable with the clients for a variety of reasons. Sure, you know what I mean?
Right.
And we ask them to do a personal inventory and say, yeah,
what am I reacting to?
Yeah. Sometimes they're just like, I just don't like him. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Like, I'm glad you recognize that. That now puts you in the driver's seat to make better decisions. You know, you're going to continue working with them. And if you are, how are you going to detach away from that? Right. I just don't like this guy. You know what I mean? Nobody said you had to like your client to help them. That's not a prerequisite. That's not something that you have to do, but it will reflect in that. And I've seen that tons of times where therapists get mad at clients for relapsing, and then as like a punishment, they make them go to more treatment and stuff like that. Weird things, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think that for clinicians, this is a concept that can be used for everybody. Everybody can get on board with this. Is how can we get ourselves away from these zero-sum games? Because I already know who the winner of that is. So I don't play games that I know I'm going to lose. That's silly. Why would you ever play that game? So
is the habit you get your clients into is getting them to ask, what's in it for me in following this rule? Mm-hmm. And if they're able to come up with an answer, success, then, and that's the therapist definition.
Yeah.
Success, the therapist asks what's in it for me, that maybe, I mean, I'm not going to lie. It feels good to help a client get through a program.
Sure.
And
sure.
And the PO, what's in it for me? Again, just, I mean, I know it's more than just, I don't have to write a warrant request. I know it's more than that, but still that's not nothing. So we might, the client, therapist, and PO might all have different reasons, but as long as they unite along the same success as the outcome through asking what's in it for me, they're all playing a game. It's a positive sum game.
Right. So I'd say, look, clinicians, if you hear, or even POs for that matter, or anybody in who's working with a client, if you hear them refer to things as like a game, don't think of it as them trivializing that. Like, kind of probe a little bit. And if they're, semi-serious, embrace that and use that to your advantage. You can turn that now into a strategy. And considering it to be a game and turning it into a strategy, dude, again, I don't care why you're making the right decisions so long as you're making the right decisions. And and if you're asking the question, what's in it for me? Your decision does not have to be based on my moral thinking about whatever the behavior is or anybody else's, other than it's not leading you back to incarceration and it's not hurting other people.
Perfect. Fine by me.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's a good concept for everybody to pay attention to.
This is ready for group.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Good. Hey, I was going to ask you something before I was just thinking, remember how we were talking about Epstein getting murked or whatever?
Yeah.
The more I think about that, there's just no way. You know how fascinating it is when you tell somebody, if you just tell somebody a camera was out, that's all anybody needs to hear. That's all anybody needs to hear.
To conclude.
Right. Like a camera was out. Oh my God. Well, then it must well,
there was more than that.
Like what?
The hyoid bone thing.
Okay. So here's my thing. Let me just say.
Worth considering.
Okay. So in order for, let's just say, somebody who has access, right, to a facility, could they get in there and kill somebody if they had access? I think the answer is yes. Could they get away with it? No. So you think about it. You'd have to go through a secure door that requires a code. Open that. You'd have to have a central staff like pass you through a slider. They'd have to open one door, go into Sallyport. They have to buzz you through another door. You have to go by them, wave at them. You have to get buzzed into another door. Then with a key card, get into another door. Then they have to buzz in another door.
I get that.
And then you're saying somebody did that and walked out without anybody noticing?
No. And
and nobody's gonna, and that's an incredible secret.
3 people can keep a secret if 2 are dead.
There you go. Yeah.
So but that's what it would require is if enough money. I mean, so the theory, right, is that some elite multi-billionaire lined the pockets of the minimum required amount of people for that to happen.
And one of their family members would say something.
I know.
The only way it is magic.
Let's not rule that out.
Okay. Somebody turned into smoke and went through a vent and then appeared in the cell and then killed him and then turned back into smoke and went back through the vent.
Old smoke assassin trick.
That's the only way. Yeah. I was just thinking, because we talked about that before, and I was like, no, he's probably just a billionaire that knew his life was over and he's going to get charged with everything under the sun and wanted to die. That makes way more sense. But like saying there's a camera out, I don't care. Like, think of how many just little things are,
I just want to hear a doctor explain the bones in the neck that were crushed. I mean, if a smart enough doctor is able to say like, no, actually that can get crushed through hanging. But like everything I saw just said that there's no way that the way that he hung himself would break that bone. I want to hear that explained by someone smarter than me.
The only thing I'd say is even if his head was chopped off, I don't care. I don't care.
He's cut his own head off.
Yeah. I'd say, man, I don't know how he did it, but he did it. I can't believe that somebody got into a secure facility and did that. It just doesn't make any sense. But he's like, dude, the Clintons. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way, dude. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm glad we cleared that up or not. Smoke assassination. Okay, see you guys. Well, that about does it for this episode of the Guerrilla Social Work Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please help us grow by giving us a 5-star rating and sharing with a friend. We'd like to stay and chat longer, but we're lying. Good night.